Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was born on January the 15th, 1929, as Michael Luther King Jr. He was named after his father, Reverend Michael King Sr., or Daddy King. Daddy King changed he and his son's name when he returned to Atlanta, Georgia, after spending time in Germany. He named he and his son Martin after the German Protestant leader. Now, throughout young Martin's childhood, he faced racism and segregation, which fueled his inspiration. He graduated from high school at the age of 15, and he received his bachelor's degree from Morehouse College in 1948 at the age of 19. In 1953, he completed his residence for doctorate, and in that same year, he married Miss Coretta Scott King. Martin and Coretta created a beautiful family, which consisted of 2 sons and 2 daughters. And by 1954, Martin, a strong civil rights activist, became pastor of the Dexter Avenue Baptist Church in Montgomery, Alabama, and he served as a member on the executive committee of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, also known as the NAACP. Now, at the end of 1955, Martin accepted the leadership of the first great Negro nonviolent demonstration of contemporary times in the United States. And he worked alongside none other than Miss Rosa Parks during the bus boycott, a boycott that was described by Gunayan in his presentation speech in honor of the Loretta. Martin and Rosa and many other activists worked on the boycott for 382 days. And during this time, Martin, he was arrested, he faced personal abuse, and his home was bombed. Martin went through a lot, but this did not deter him. He emerged as a Negro leader of the first rank, and a victory was won. On December the 21st, 1956, the Supreme Court declared laws requiring segregation on buses unconstitutional, and Negroes and whites rode buses as equals. This was a significant victory for the civil rights movement. And in 1957, Martin was elected president of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, and by May 17th of 1957, he spoke before a crowd of 15,000 people in Washington, D.C. And now between the years of 1957 and 1968, Martin traveled over an estimated 6 million miles and spoke to over 2,500 times. Martin achieved many things during this time between 1957 and 1968, and he had many experiences, good and bad. He wrote books, but he also nearly lost his life when he was stabbed by an assailant in Harlem. He met President Dwight D. Eisenhower. He studied in India. He launched sit-ins, which landed him in jail again, although he was released after intervention by John and Robert Kennedy. He studied in Raleigh, North Carolina, and interstate segregation travel was banned. by the Interstate Commerce Commissions because of the work done by Martin and the Freedom Riders. But he was unsuccessful when he made his trip to Albany, Georgia. King was arrested and jailed in Albany, Georgia, which was one of the many times he found himself in jail during his fight for equality and injustice. In fact, when he was in jail in Birmingham, Alabama, for 11 days, he wrote his famous letter, which inspired the Birmingham Agreement, an agreement that resulted in Martin's charges being dropped, implementation of the hiring of black people in workforces, and desegregation of restaurants, stores, and schools. Martin led 125,000 people on a freedom walk in Detroit, and he conducted the largest civil rights demonstration in history, with over 250,000 people in attendance, when he delivered his famous "I Have a Dream" address. Times Magazine featured Martin as Man of the Year, and by the age of 35, he was the youngest man who received a Nobel Peace Prize. Martin, being the great man that he was, he donated his Nobel Peace Prize winnings of $54,123 to the civil rights movement. Martin was one of the most passionate and strongest civil rights activists of all times. But this would all come to an end on April the 4th, 1968. On April the 4th, 1968, Martin was assassinated while standing on the balcony of his hotel room at the Lorraine Motel in Memphis, Tennessee. Dr. King's passing was one of the saddest days in American history. And on November the 2nd, 1983, President Ronald Reagan signed the King Holiday Bill into law. Now this bill, it established Martin Luther King Jr. Day. And this day is the day in which we celebrate and observe as Dr. King's birthday. Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. January the 15th, 1929 to April the 4th, 1968. Happy birthday, Dr. King.